Hello Qiskiters! I'm Abby Mitchell and I am a quantum developer advocate on the Qiskit community team. So in our last video we discussed what is open source and why it's important, and a little bit about what the Qiskit ecosystem is. In this video we're going to walk you through step by step the basics of how to open source your code with GitHub, and also how to reference it in your research papers. So okay, let's get started. For some prerequisites that you'll need to follow along with this with this video is you need to have a code project. Here I just have mine displayed in VS Code. You need to have a terminal open, and you need to have kind of moved yourself into your project within your terminal. So mine is just called My Cool Project. I've opened a terminal here within VS Code. You don't have to use VS Code. You can have a different terminal. You can have a different code editor. This is just the workflow that I use, and a lot of these concepts should be transferable between different IDEs. If you're not familiar with how to open a terminal in VS Code, you can just go to this top bar here and open a terminal. I find it very convenient for keeping everything kind of together. As well as that, you'll need to have opened an account with GitHub. That's pretty easy to do. They just go to github.com and it's very easy to sign up and get started. And then they give you instructions for how to authenticate your local machine with your GitHub account. Okay, so what we're gonna do in this video is we have got a project here that we want to publish on GitHub, and this will be how we open source that code. So to start off with, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository here within our GitHub account. So this is my account here. I'm on this repositories tab at the top, and I'm just going to click this big green button that says new. And this is going to create a new repository. So what I need to do to start off with is I'm not going to use a template for this. I already have the code already that I know that I want to push up and put on GitHub. So I'm going to kind of create the shell of that project here within GitHub. So I need to give it a repository name. And I need to make sure that the name that I type in here is exactly the same as the name of the project that I have locally on my machine. You can also add a description as well. This is kind of a one-liner to give the TLDR of what your project is, and helps people when they're just clicking through GitHub to find it. So I'm just going to give it a very simple thing called My Cool Project. If you want to have it, I recommend that you start off with making your code public, because this really encourages more collaboration and is more in line with the spirit of open source. But just make sure if you do create your project in a public mode, that just make sure that you don't have any passwords or API keys or anything in your project when you do that. If you're unsure, start off with making it private, and then you can change the settings later to make it public if you so wish. At this stage, we're not going to add a README. A README is just an extra file for people to kind of understand what your project is about. It's normally the first file that is presented to you when you see the repository on GitHub. We're not going to start off with that for now, but we will discuss READMEs in a later video. And again, you don't need to add a gitignore or a choose license at this stage. All we're going to do is the name and the description and make it public, and then we're going to create this repository. Okay, so now you can see we have created this project under my GitHub account. We can now see I have My Cool Project. At the moment, this is just an empty shell here in GitHub. And GitHub gives you a few different steps of instructions for how you can essentially fill this project with your code. We're going to kind of do our own method, but these are also really helpful depending on what level you're starting out with your project. So yeah, at the moment, this is just an empty husk of a repository that's on GitHub. It's in the cloud, but we need to now connect our local code, what we have on our local machine, we need to get that into GitHub and kind of connect it with this MyCool project here. In order to get our project that we have on our machine locally here and connect it to our project in our empty project up in GitHub, the first thing that we need to do is initialize our project on our computer as a Git repository. If you are unfamiliar with Git and the difference between Git and GitHub, don't worry, like it's a bit confusing if you're unfamiliar with it. Git is essentially what's called a version control system, and platforms like GitHub are platforms that use Git. So Git is the open source technology that enables you to, move code around, track history of code changes over time, and GitHub is the platform that kind of facilitates that with a nice website view. But in order for our project to be, connected to GitHub and viewable on GitHub, we need to initialize it as a Git repository. And this is really easy to do. If you have Git installed on your computer, most computers I think do by default, all we have to do is type in git init -b main. So git init is the thing that actually initializes the project as a Git project, and -b main is essentially me saying that the code that I'm seeing here at the moment is just literally one file called Hello Quantum. That is the code as it currently looks is going to be my main branch. It's going to be the single kind of source of truth of that code. We're not going to discuss different branching strategies in this video, but essentially at a later date, if you wanted to expand your project, you can have other branches of your code which differ from the main branch, but this main branch will always be kind of like one, the main branch, funnily enough. So I'm just going to type this git init -b main in my terminal, hit enter, and you can see here that it's initialized now our project as it says it's empty. That's because we haven't formally added anything and pushed. I have quite a nice filter on my terminal where I can see now that which branch I'm in. So if I create new branches, I could create branches like my cool feature, my other cool feature. If I wanted to, that could also show up, but we're not going to worry about that for this video. We're just going through the basics here. Now that I have initialized this repository, I'm going to go to this tab here in my VS Code setup. And this is, you can see here, if I hover over it, it's called the source control tab. I really like this view because it can show me, it really helps to show the flow of how we're working with Git. You can also just rely on your terminal. You absolutely do not need to have this, but it's a useful feature if you're like me and you prefer things that are a little bit more visual. Okay, I'm just expanding the screens a little bit so we can see it a bit better. So next what we're going to do is we need to, now that we've initialized our project as a Git project, what we need to do now is we need to basically have this empty Git project, and we need to add the files that are in this folder to our Git project. And once we've added them, we can then commit them. And once we've committed them, we can then push them up to the GitHub platform. So let's break down each of those steps a bit more. In order to add files to this kind of staging area, we can just type in git add and then a full stop in the terminal and hit enter. And that will add all of our files into this kind of staging area. I like to show it here on the side because sometimes, you don't know if you might accidentally add files that you didn't want. Using the full stop means you're literally adding everything. You can also add your files individually by saying git add hello quantum if you wanted to, just add that individual file. But if you're adding 100 files, then using the full stop is good enough. But then sometimes say like you have some extra like metadata or some other random file that you didn't want to add, you can remove that. You don't have to push it, and you can see I like to do that just with the UI. And so I can see here, I just have this file that I've added that is staged to get committed and added to our project. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to commit this file that I want to add. Committing is essentially, it's kind of a snapshot in time for your code. It's essentially like you are saving your work at this point, and when you commit little and often, you can kind of build up some kind of historical log of how your code has changed over time. And then you can use some other Git commands, or you can see on GitHub like a historical backlog of all the changes you've made. And so this is why we really call technologies like Git are called source control or version control, because you're controlling different versions of your code through this process of committing. So to do this, what I'm going to do, now that I've added the file into the staging area, I have my little plus here in my terminal, so it shows that I have some files in the staging area. I'm going to say git commit -m. -m means I'm going to add a message. It's really good practice to add messages to your commits so that you can see when you're looking at your history of your code, like what did you do at that point? Like what did you change and what are you saving now? So for this one, this is the first one we're doing. I'm just going to call it first commit, and then I add the phrase first commit in air quotes there, and then I hit enter. And now I have essentially committed this committed this file. And you can see as you can make changes, for example. Let's say now that I've done this, I could say, oh, actually, maybe I want to edit this file and I want to add another print line. And I want to say, hello, quantum world, again. And I save this file. Great, I've made an extra change. I can see again, look, it's popped up here. I've made new changes. I can add it by clicking the plus icon here or doing git add like I did before. It's in the staging area, and then I can, again, do git commit -m. You can also put in a commit message here in the commit box as well, if you prefer a more kind of graphical interface. As you can see, I kind of do like a weird hybrid thing of lots of, like some UI-based things, some code like typing-based things. There is no right or wrong way. Some people get really kind of hung up on there's a pure way of doing all this, but do whatever you find is the most comfortable. You can follow some best practices, but if you prefer doing things in a graphical user interface, that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to add another commit message to this. I'm going to say, added a new print statement. There's a lot of best practices for how to write good commit messages. You don't just want to say things like, did some stuff. You want to try as succinctly as possible to explain what you did. And I think we're going to link in the description to some kind of good examples for how you can write good commit messages. But yeah, just try to be to the point, but provide the necessary details so that if you're looking back at this, you'll understand what you did. So I'm committing this, and I've committed. So next what I need to do is I have some code that I made some changes. I've committed them. I've kind of started to build up that history. Now I want to take this kind of empty shell of a repo that I have in GitHub, and I want to connect my local project to that project in GitHub. So at this point, I'm going to introduce two different, some terminology that is quite Git specific, and that's the concept of remotes. So we say that the code that we have in the project on our machine, we call our local code. That's the project that sits on my files on my computer here. Anything that is hosted on GitHub, that's in the cloud, that we say is remote. And this MyCool project here that we just created is going to be our remote origin. And this is going to be important for the next commands that I show you, because we need to make sure that my project here, on my local machine, we need to make sure that it knows the remote origin that it should be kind of sharing the code with. So to do that, I'm going to write in a very simple command called git remote add origin. And I need to copy this link here that GitHub nicely shows you. This is kind of the address of your GitHub project on the internet that we want to connect our local project to. So I just hit enter there, and if I want to check that I have added that remote, I can type in git remote -v. And I can see now I have here listed under origin, I have this URL for that project that I created. Okay, so now I've created my project in GitHub. I have my project locally. I've initialized it as a Git repository. I have added the files. I've committed the files. I have added the remote, so I've connected the two. Now I just need to actually do the action of pushing that code from my computer to the remote origin. And to do that, I'm going to use the command git push -u origin main. And this is important. I need to say, because I was here, I initialized this as the main branch. I want to push to the origin, and I want to push to the origin main branch. I'll just extend that a bit so you can see it better. There you go. Git push origin main. I hit enter. I'm able to see it does a whole load of things. You don't need to worry about too much. Now if I refresh my project here in GitHub, haha, voila! Now you can see, look, we have our Hello Quantum. Ta-da! And you can see as well, this is the line of the last commit that I made. And if I go to this icon called history, I can see this kind of historical timeline of the different commits that I made. So if I went back to this commit, I can see exactly what change was added. So this is really how Git and GitHub become really powerful tools to track the history and track the development of your project. Okay, so now that we have this, we have done the very basic bare minimum to say that you have open sourced your project. Woohoo, congratulations. So now let's say you've done, okay, I showed you a very trivial example here. I had one file that doesn't really do much, just for kind of demonstration purposes. But let's say hypothetically you had like a very nice piece of research code that you have done for some quantum paper that you've written. You can actually cite your GitHub project that you've created here in that in your paper. So I'm just going to show you one example here, which is how one way of citing your code in your paper, one that quite a few IBMers use when they're publishing their work, and that is just really in the last section of your paper, after your acknowledgements, you can add a section called code availability, and then just literally add one line that your source code for this work is available at, and then add that URL for your GitHub repository. And that way, people can just click that link really easily and go see the code that was used for that paper. Another thing that I want to just give a quick shout out to, it's not GitHub focused, but another important aspect of open sourcing your code is also open sourcing any data that you produced as a result of the code that you've run. And one way of doing this that is quite popular amongst our IBM researchers is to open source your data through a platform called Zenodo. And this is just an example of how you can do that. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but essentially if you have any JSON files with data outputs from any circuits you've run or any research you've done, you can also publish that data and reference it in a very similar way in a section called data availability. And these things together really help promote this idea of open source. And yeah, the last thing I want to say on this is also, you don't have to wait to publish your paper to open source your code. It is completely okay if your code isn't perfect. That is the whole point of open source, is to encourage collaboration. You can have this historical kind of commit history to kind of show how your code has improved over time. And so, yeah, it's better sometimes to, commit little and often and push and open source things as things progress and develop, rather than keeping everything on your computer and only sharing it at the last minutes, because sometimes you can just get hung up and feel like it will just never get published because you feel like it's not perfect. But that's really not, like, the culture of open source is to do your work in public and share that and make mistakes in public, and that's how you write better code and produce better software. Okay, so there we have it. Today we covered how to publish your code on GitHub and also how to cite it in your research paper. Next time we're going to look at some open source best practices, so how to take a small project that you've already hosted on GitHub and make it into a high quality project, and also how to submit that project to join the Qiskit ecosystem. Thanks for joining, everyone. Remember to like, subscribe, do all the things, comment in the description if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.